What happens to a man when he sees too much? When he hears the lies, watches the faces, reads the headlines, and realizes none of it is real? A child is born in the heat of empire, not into power, not into wealth, but into a machine, a system he would later spend his life dismantling with words. His name was Eric Arthur Blair, but history remembers him as George Orwell. He was born in 1903 in a small British outpost in Motihari, India. His father was a colonial civil servant. His mother, creative and independent, took young Eric back to England when he was just 1 year old. The separation from his father would become one of many ghosts that haunted his relationships and his sense of belonging. England wasn't home. Not really. He grew up in Henley-on-Thames, surrounded by fog, silence, and class boundaries too rigid to cross. The Blair family wasn't poor, but they weren't rich either. They belonged to what Orwell would later call the lower upper middle class. He learned early what it meant to feel out of place. At the age of 8, he was sent to a private boarding school, St. Cyprian's, on scholarship. There, he rubbed shoulders with the children of the elite. He wore hand-me-downs while they had new uniforms. He was mocked for his poverty. He watched. He remembered. Years later, in one of his most biting essays, he called the school a little world of snobbery, cruelty, and ambition. But even in that misery, something was forming. He began to write poems, stories, fragments, and he began to see the cracks in the society he was told was perfect. He earned a scholarship to Eton, one of the most prestigious schools in England. There, he was taught by Aldous Huxley, who would later write Brave New World. But Orwell wasn't interested in joining the ruling class. He rejected their politics, their polished lies, their games. He wanted to understand the world from below, so he left. Instead of going to university, he joined the Imperial Police in Burma at the age of 19. He spent 5 years enforcing colonial rule and learning to hate it. He saw what it meant to hold power over others, to enforce silence, to wear a uniform that made people afraid, and he knew deeply that he was part of something wrong. When he returned to England, he resigned from the police. Not quietly, but with purpose. He wanted to write about what he'd seen. But first, he chose to live it. He walked away from middle-class safety and deliberately entered poverty. He lived in flop houses, worked as a dishwasher in the back streets of Paris, slept on floors, scraped together meals. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to see how society treated its invisible people. The result was his first book, Down and Out in Paris and London. He didn't sign it as Eric Blair. He called himself George Orwell. George, a name that felt solid, English. Orwell, taken from a quiet river he loved in Suffolk. A new identity. A mask that told the truth. He kept writing. He took odd jobs. Schoolteacher, bookshop assistant, critic. But always he wrote. Essays, diaries, articles. His mind turned constantly toward power, hypocrisy, and injustice. He wrote a novel, Burmese Days, about colonial corruption. Another, Keep the Aspidistra Flying, about poverty and dignity. And another, The Road to Wigan Pier, which shocked England with its raw portraits of the working poor. But Orwell wasn't just interested in writing about suffering. He would go to war for it. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War broke out, a fight between fascism and democracy. And Orwell, ever the idealist, traveled to Spain to fight for the leftist cause. But what he found there wasn't the clear-cut heroism he expected. He fought alongside anarchists and socialists, but soon found himself caught in a storm of betrayal. The left was turning on itself. Fellow fighters disappeared. Propaganda spread like poison. Truth was rewritten by the hour. And then a sniper's bullet tore through his throat. He almost died. Spain didn't break Orwell. It forged him. He returned to England shaken, angry, more certain than ever that truth was fragile, always under threat. He wrote Homage to Catalonia, a brutal account of the lies that plagued the war. Few read it at the time, but it would become one of the most important eyewitness reports of political betrayal in the 20th century. Back in England, he struggled with poor health, poverty, and rejection. But the world was changing. War was coming again. During World War II, Orwell worked for the BBC, writing propaganda to support the war effort. But he hated it. He knew how dangerous words could be, and he began to feel trapped. As if even the institutions on the good side were using language to control thought. During this time he wrote The Lion and the Unicorn, where he imagined a truly democratic and socialist England, patriotic yet just. He still believed in change, but he was running out of time. In 1944, Orwell sat down to write something different. A story with animals. Simple language, but underneath, razor-sharp truth. Animal Farm. A fairy tale about revolution, betrayal and tyranny. The pigs rise to power. They promise equality. But soon, one pig declares himself leader. He rewrites history. He silences dissent. He becomes something worse than what came before. No one believes more firmly than Comrade Napoleon, Orwell writes, that all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. The book was rejected by several publishers. Too dangerous, too political. But eventually it was published, and it became an instant success. Orwell had found his voice, but his body was failing. Tuberculosis. He was coughing blood. His wife, Eileen, died suddenly during surgery. And Orwell, now alone and grieving, moved to a remote island in Scotland. It was there, on Jura, surrounded by cold wind and loneliness, that he began to write his final book. He typed through illness, fever, pain. He smoked constantly. He barely ate. He worked in bursts, often collapsing in bed between paragraphs. And then 1984 was born, a story of totalitarianism, a story of thought crime, surveillance, censorship, torture. A world where the party rewrites the past, where truth is whatever the party says it is, where love is illegal, where Big Brother is always watching. It was his warning, his prophecy, his final plea. He didn't live long enough to see its full impact. George Orwell died in January 1950. He was 46, but his words didn't die. They live in classrooms, headlines, governments. They echo in protests, in censorship debates, in surveillance fears. They live in us when we question the official story, when we say no to silence, when we dare to speak. He gave us the language to fight back. He gave us metaphors that carry meaning decades later. Doublethink, thought crime, Big Brother, Newspeak. He showed us that truth isn't always safe, but it is necessary. He was not a perfect man. He was angry, often difficult, sometimes wrong, but he was honest. And in a world of endless lies, that's everything. So if you ever feel that something's wrong, that the world you're being shown doesn't match the world you feel, pick up a copy of 1984, or Animal Farm, or any of his essays. Listen, and remember, truth is a weapon. Use it carefully. Use it bravely. Use it like Orwell did, while you still can.